I want to take you in a different direction. This is something that came up at a news conference. Peter Ducey had asked the question about a $450,000 payment to illegals. And this is something I never thought I would see in America, that we were going to pay people that cross the border illegally and to all of a sudden be offering them $450,000. And by the way, the president at first denied it, and then his spokesperson said, no, we are doing it through the Department of Justice.
Well, to answer your question, it's reprehensible. It really gets underneath everybody's skin. People are rightly outraged by it, and they very well should be, because it's their country, literally their own Justice Department, throwing in the towel. This is not something that the United States taxpayers even has to pay. The lawsuit itself is frivolous in a sense that I did a lot of research on this. I'm always as a contractor, I've had a lot of experience in court, federal court, both sides. And the one thing, and I've sued states and things like that. And the one thing that comes up is the word sovereign immunity. Sovereign immunity means that state can't be sued for financial penalties. And the reason for that, and that is an extension of sovereign immunity from the federal government. And the reason for that was, it was at the founding, if the country got, sued and had to make reparations to other, and it's funny, use the same word here, reparations. You have to make reparations to foreign governments or foreign entities. Well, it could bankrupt, it could loot the treasury, bankrupt the treasury. So for that reason, sovereign immunity was the law of the land since the founding. That's somewhat changed. I really want to kind of educate the people who are listening to me, because they really got to know, and they really have to know what's going on. Sovereign immunity was the law of the land until about 1919. You say, well, how do you get around sovereign immunity? Because people do, they do that all the time. Well, there was a Bivens case that happened in 1971. And these were unnamed federal agents that violated someone's Fourth Amendment right. And so out of the Bivens, so the Supreme Court, Bivens was was the plaintiff, allowed financial penalties to be made, but you're not suing the federal government. You're suing that individual acting in his official capacity. So under that paradigm or that scheme, you could sue the federal government by default, because you're not really suing the federal government. You're suing the individual working in their capacity for the federal government, and in those cases, the lawsuit can move forward. That the Bivens case, that was in 1971. A decade or two later, it was expanded to include Fifth and Eighth Amendment violations, and but then what happened is the Supreme Court kind of did a reversal on that, and they started saying, you know what, we don't really think so. Recently, and if you can recall, there was 2 years ago, there was a cross-border shooting, and that's the case of Hernandez v. Mesa, and in that case, our border patrol was doing what they do, border patrol, and a couple kids from the Mexican side were going back and forth. And one of the border patrol agents fired his weapon. One of the 15-year-old kid was shot, killed, and right away there was a Bivens case, meaning, hey, we're not going to sue the federal government, we can't sue the United States, but we can get around the sovereign immunity because we're going to sue this particular agent, and and of course the border patrol agency, and we're gonna go around it that way. Well, that made it to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said, no, you know what, we don't do that no more. Essentially, I'm paraphrasing, but in layman's terms, we're not doing that anymore. So they've essentially, what the legal term is, they gutted the Bivens case. So essentially, sovereign immunity is still law of the land, reigns supreme. So then you got to be asking yourself, all right, if that's the case, what the hell is going on here? Well, what's going on here is, in 2018, as you know, we had the illegal aliens are coming over during the Trump administration. Trump administration instituted a policy of separation at the border, which, if the parent does something illegal, what are you going to do with the kid? Leave him there? No, the kid take the kid into custody and provide for the kid, which is what the ICE did at the time. However, they were sued by the ACLU, and it ended up being, and the case is Miss L, who was Congolese. She wasn't even from South America. She's from Africa. Miss L from that, and I'm only highlighting that is to give you an extent of where the people coming across your border are coming from. They're coming from halfway around the world, the other side of the world. They're not just coming from South America or Latin America. So the case on which everything else is predicated, this Miss L, Congolese. She's from Congo. So if she's Congolese, she comes over and, at the time, there was ACLU files a lawsuit, Miss L versus ICE, and this during the Trump administration. And as you know, the president got involved and said, "Okay, we're going to stop." He kind of short-circuited the litigation. He said, "We're going to refrain from taking those steps." So. What happened after that, and of course you've heard a lot of other things said, the Flores case, and I'm only bringing this up or interjecting this here is because the complaint with regard to Mrs. L was they were held too long, held beyond the 72 hours, all that, and they didn't, you're not allowed to keep child in the family separated from the family unit for more than so many days, and all that comes from the Flores case. The Flores case goes back to Janet Reno and Bill Clinton days in the 1990s. And the interesting thing about the Flores case, so you could really understand the total disconnect that we have here is the Flores case said that an influx of minors, and they should be where an influx is an emergency, like you have an influx of minors, like the most you're ever going to get. And an influx was determined as minors more than 130. And in that case, we were supposed to have 80 beds available to provide for an influx of minors. Well, apparently they didn't get the memo from 2018 because you don't have 130 kids, 10,000 kids. There's no way the federal government could ever be consistent with the Flores case because the Flores case is from 3 decades or 4 decades ago and really no longer, situationally, no longer really applies to what we see at the border. So it's a complete farce in that regard. But nonetheless, that's where that comes from.
John Kovacs joining us, candidate for Congress in Nevada's 3rd Congressional District. We're talking about this bizarre notion that the Department of Justice will dole out $450,000 to illegals. You have some final thoughts, John?
You do. So we talked about the Flores case, the Bivens case, and the L case of ICE. Lastly, the Miss L case talked about the separations at the border. So what was that followed with? The Sessions case. And that was actually Jefferson Beauregard Sessions was the former Attorney General of the United States being sued by the ACLU in his official capacity to circumvent sovereign immunity, which honestly was a dead loser on account of the Bevins case was gutted 2 years earlier by the Supreme Court. However, so how are we still paying him $450,000? Due to because Section Title 28 of the U.S. Code, Chapter 161, Section 2414 states that in matters of lawsuits referred to the Attorney General. The Attorney General has the right to settle those lawsuits. Who's the Attorney General? Merrick Garland, the same guy who nobody wanted to be at the Supreme Court. Merrick Garland. And as a result of the Bivens case, essentially you could argue that case with a stuffed animal could get up there, argue the case, and still win for the government. So the government doesn't want to litigate the case because they'll win. So what they're doing, they're settling the case. Nonsense. So you should be totally irate that the government on their own unilaterally is giving these people money, your money. And we're going to go into inflation and talk about, how come you can't afford a turkey? Your rent is going to go up a couple $100 when you renew your lease, And you know what? Who's getting $450,000? These people are. Are they entitled to it? No. Are they going to get it? Hopefully not. Now that you know, that's the story, and that's how they got around with it, and that's why they're settling. They're not settling because they're going to lose the lawsuit. They're settling because they're going to win the lawsuit. That's what you should be upset about, irate about, outraged about, angered about. That's what it is. And that's why they're giving these people money. Another slap in the face to the Americans and everybody else who play by the rules.